General's Department, they are with us on my right. The Environmental Management Committee, and the members of the public who are here, and most especially the members of the media who convey to the public what these meetings are about. My name is Boindradat Tiwari. I'm the chairman of the PAC and the member for Caroni Central. The purpose of this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee is to examine the audited financial statements of the EMA, the Environmental Management Authority, and we cover the years 2010 to 12 in terms of audited accounts and the authority's expenditure and internal controls for the years 2010 to 2018. The committee is desirous of hearing the challenges being faced by the key stakeholders at the Environmental Management Authority, EMA, in an attempt to determine some of the possible solutions to these challenges. The role of the committee is to help the EMA improve its delivery of services in an efficient, effective, and economic manner. This meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can send their comments related to today's topic by email to parl101@ttparliament.org. They can do it on facebook.com/ttparliament and on Twitter @ttparliament. What I will do at this point is to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, and then I will ask the members who are here for this engagement to introduce themselves from the Ministry of Planning, Auditor General's Department, and the EMA. So I will have my colleagues, maybe starting from the right, introduce themselves so you know who you're dealing with.
Good morning, Adrian Leons, member.
Good morning, Paula Gopiskun, member.
Good morning, Taharko Bika, Vice Chairman.
Good morning, Shri Prasad, member.
Okay, and you, starting with Permanent Secretary.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Joanne Deoraj. I'm the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Planning and Development. I'll ask my team to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Jacqueline Weeks-Penko, Director, Planning Division.
Good morning, David Prasad, Environmental Manager, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good morning, Sandra Sucharan, Auditor 2, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good morning, Kirk Baksh, Accountant Executive 1, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Okay, and the members of the EMA.
Good morning, Najwa Nataigian, Chairman of the EMA.
Good morning, Judy Daniel, Deputy Chairman of the EMA.
Good morning, Vyash Nadlal, Member of the Board, EMA.
Good morning, Hayden Romano, Managing Director of the EMA.
Hello, good morning, Janelle Partap, Manager Legal Services, EMA.
Good morning, Vanessa Young, Financial Accountant, EMA.
Good morning, Wayne Rajkumar, Manager Technical Services, EMA.
Good morning, Dale Cozier, Senior Project Manager, EMA.
All right, members of the Auditor General's Department.
And good morning all. Shiva Sananan, Assistant Auditor General.
Good morning, Anisha Bash, Assistant Audit Director, Auditor General.
All right, good morning again to all of you and welcome. I wonder if I could ask the Permanent Secretary if she'd like to make an opening statement, and I'll ask the same of the Chairman afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, and thank you for the opportunity to join with the Environmental Management Authority here today. The Environmental Management Authority is one of the statutory agencies under the purview of the Ministry of Planning and Development, and we are very hopeful that we can provide the information and address the concerns of the committee today in our proceedings. Thank you.
Chairman and members of the Public Account Committee, good morning and thank you for your invitation. The Environmental Management Authority welcomes this opportunity to meaningfully participate in the work of the Parliament via this public hearing. I acknowledge that you are in possession of our written responses, but I would like to highlight the following. The EMA was established 24 years ago with the important task of coordinating, facilitating, and overseeing the execution of the national environmental strategy and programs, promoting public awareness of environmental concerns, and establishing an effective regulatory regime to protect, enhance, and conserve the environment. This the EMA approaches through cooperation in a manner that facilitates participation, promotes consensus, and by providing opportunities for alternative dispute resolution. The current board of directors was first appointed in June 2016 and reappointed in 2018. During our first term of office, the board committed to meeting its statutory and other requirements in a timely manner, and where outstanding, to bring them to completion. This was successfully achieved, and in doing so, the board recognized the need to identify priority strategic areas of focus to ensure that the objectives of its 2017 to 2021 strategic plan are achieved. This was facilitated through a blue skies brainstorming session early in its second term, which also benefited from staff participation. In light of the economic challenges being faced by the country, one area of focus is on improving the financial stability of the EMA by reducing dependence on government's funding. The authority draws upon sections 72 to 78 of the EM Act, which provides for the establishment of an environmental trust fund. Mr. Chairman and members of the PAC, please permit me to highlight some achievements of the EMA. First, the EMA has successfully completed its financial audits up to 2017, and in accordance with Section 14 of the EM Act, submitted all annual reports up to 2017 to our line ministry, the Ministry of Planning and Development. May I elaborate that these annual reports include an assessment of the state of the environment, notably prepared in-house, and the audited statement as well. We anticipate that the 2018 annual report will be completed and submitted by May 2019, a first-time accomplishment for the EMA. The second highlight I would like to make would be with respect to the National Environmental Policy, which I'm referring to as NEP. This was revised to bring into alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the government's own National Development Strategy, known as Vision 2030, and to address current environmental issues experienced by citizens. The NEP requires national mobilization to achieve successful implementation. For this, we request and anticipate your support and that of your other parliamentary colleagues. Environmentally sound waste management is critical for Trinidad and Tobago. With a global and national call to action, the EMA has taken steps to draft the waste management, registration, and permitting rules. And following the statutory public comment period, comments from stakeholders are currently being addressed. We are cautiously optimistic that these rules will be law by November 2019. Pursuant to the ruling of the Privy Council in November 2017, in Fishermen and Friends of the Sea versus the Ministry of Planning, Housing and the Environment, the EMA has revised its Water Pollution Rules 2001 to give effect to the polluter pays principle. The draft revised rules is currently out for public comment. This principle has evolved over time, and the revision will close the gap that presently exists in the application of other modern-day principles of equity, environmental justice, and the internalization of costs by those that pollute the environment. The EMA is also partnering with the Ministry of Planning and Development and will play a critical role as host of the knowledge management system for the National Climate Mitigation, Monitoring, Reporting, and Verification Systems for Trinidad and Tobago. This system aims to track the progress of efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the achievement of our nationally determined contribution in support of the Paris Agreement, which TT ratified in February 2018. Through the Green Fund-sponsored Recycling Solid Waste Collection Project, commonly known as the ICARE program, the EMA encourages citizens to separate their beverage containers and deposit these recyclable resources in specifically marked collection bins. And this is a first step in public engagement on waste management in Trinidad and Tobago. We are also strategically working with all our stakeholders, including the THA, to address multiple environmental concerns which have been identified through our various public engagements. The top 5 concerns identified were waste management, air pollution, noise pollution, land use planning, squatting, and marine pollution. Our major challenge, like most other organizations in Trinidad and Tobago today, is budgetary constraints. In 2016, our transfer from government was 46.5 million, whilst for this financial year it has been reduced to 38 million, a significant portion of which will be consumed by the cost of litigation. As such, the EMA has been forced to operate within a stringent financial environment. I'm coming to a close. In these challenging times, we salute the commitment and dedication of the management and staff of the EMA, which continues to perform a myriad of roles and responsibilities that have elevated the EMA to become stewards of the environment in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Chairman and members, I thank you and look forward to a productive engagement.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that comprehensive outline as an opening statement, and thank you, Permanent Secretary, for your indication of willingness to engage the committee in a constructive way. I will start by asking the Deputy Auditor General if he would comment on whether the Auditor General's Department is in receipt of audited accounts from the EMA up to 2017, or whether, or how many, or what is the situation?
Thank you, Chair. We are in receipt of audited statements from the private auditors up to 2017. But as part of the control mechanism, before they are forwarded to this committee, we do a review of the auditor's working papers.
Yes.
And that is a bit challenging, because sometimes, like for 14, 15, and 16, we were put off from January to March this year, and even up to April before we could get to look at the working papers for some of these accounts. But generally, we review them, look at the integrity of the work, and then the AG will put his covering report and say it is of integrity to present to this committee.
Okay, so we are likely to get those from the, is the Auditor General's report of 2018, on 2018, going to cover any more of those?
Okay, we proposed by end of May for the latest to do 2013 to 18.
Okay.
Review of those, provided we get the cooperation and documentation from the private auditors.
All right, okay. All right, do you want to add anything?
We just would like to say, like, some of the documents we look for, sometimes the private auditors are unavailable to give it to us. Like recently, we got the management letter for 2013 in March this year. I mean, it's a big wait. But then the AG is not going to forward anything to this committee without these documents being reviewed, referencing back to the working papers, and that there's integrity in the product. And that is a major key back with our reviews.
All right. So we're looking possibly at about a 1-year wait to bring this up to date, sort of, provided all the other documents?
I would not say 1 year, maybe 2 months for the most. We're already in the field with some of the reviews, and certain documentation not received as yet. We were promised it by April, which is next week, week after. So by the end of May, we would have up to 17 at least finished and reported on.
Thank you very much. Okay, I will start by asking some general questions. Remember, when we do this, the public pays attention. And many of the questions I ask at the beginning of the meeting is really for public edification. Because people need to know what their institutions are, what they do, what is the value to them, etc., before you can get into very detailed stuff about the finances and internal audit and external audit and stuff like that. So I know, Chairman, in your own statement, you talked about some of the achievements of the EMA, and you also identified 5 challenging issues that you want to address. But I want to ask you a general question. You've been in existence, as you said, for 24 years. I know your chairmanship dates back only to 2016. But what would you say is the most valuable contribution that the EMA has made or is making to Trinidad and Tobago? And think of it from a public point of view, the citizens' interest in this matter.
Chairman, I would say that public awareness would be a major impact that the EMA has made with respect to the recognition of not just what are the environmental concerns, but by elaborating the environmental concerns, serving as catalyst for change. So one of the current manifestation of that would be with the iCare program, where now you have public and schools, because the EMA now has a network of these bins throughout, island-wide, and in over 150 secondary and primary schools. And we are seeing, that, that willingness to participate in an action that is impacting in a very positive manner on the environment. So that I would put as one of the roles, a significant role that the EMA has, taken and actually caused a cascade through public and private entities.
Right,
and
so
with your permission, perhaps the MD can also add to that, with your permission, of course.
Yeah, if you want to add, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. The EMA, when it came into being in 1995, and then the act went back to Parliament in 2000 because it needed a majority. And from that time of the majority, when every member of that Parliament supported this EMA, this organization, because they recognized the importance of environmental management in development. So the organization, with the responsibility for environmental management in Trinidad and Tobago, has been forging ahead over the last 24 years, as the chairman says, being the beacon of hope with respect to the environment. And how we measure that is every time there is an issue with respect to the environment, the first name that the citizens call is the Environmental Management Authority. Maybe we need to do more work with respect to public education, because all environmental issues are not the remit of the EMA. There are some things that are better handled by other pieces of legislation. Things like noise, where you have the police involved in terms of the Summary Offences Act. Things like marine pollution, which is much better handled in terms of the Maritime and Territorial Waters Act. And so I think what the EMA has done, as the chairman said, is to bring the environmental matters to the fore in Trinidad and Tobago. And as we move along, as we become more developed as an organization, what we are doing is increasing the coordination function in terms of getting all the various agencies involved and understanding what is their role with respect to environmental management.
Okay, I understand you. Public awareness, the main port of call on environmental matters for the citizen, for any challenges, and you're now sort of trying to coordinate as the main institution the environmental thrust for the nation. But I think from the citizen's point of view, have you at any time prevented any atrocity in Trinidad and Tobago on the environmental front? Have you had a crisis that you've managed effectively that you can show? And what is the value that you have been facilitating or are facilitating in the environmental sphere that the citizen can relate to, that can see a value in?
In terms of crises, I think one of the biggest ones that the EMA had to manage was the oil spill of 2013, the Petrotrin oil spill of 2013. And not only did we manage that incident with other agencies, but recognizing the need for further information, we've continued. And today we're doing an ecological risk assessment between Pointe-a-Pierre and Icarcus. So on that whole southwest coast, which will provide the data for us when there are other incidents and what is taking place in that area. The assessment continues, and if you want some further details, we can ask the manager of technical services to give you further details. But that came right out of crisis. So we didn't only deal with crisis, we actually manage crisis because we need to manage the environment.
Yeah. Hold on. Okay, let's say in the case of the 2013 spill, I remember we had to bring in international capacity to be able to deal with that. Have we done anything since then to, now that we've had that experience and we know what is required, have we done anything to strengthen capacity and capability and resources for something like that if it were to happen again?
Yes, we have. The agencies like the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, the Maritime Services Division, the companies in themselves, the various oil companies operating, because remember, the EMA is also regulator.
Yes.
And therefore, through the Certificate of Environmental Clearance process, the companies are required to state what will be their response if there was an event to take place. So all those documents are lodged with the EMA. So it has improved, but as always, the proof is in the eating. And as much as we would not want any incidents to happen, and we think we're doing quite a good job in monitoring compliance, we feel, fairly not comfortable that we will be able to handle any major incidents that may take place.
We've had other oil spills that are not like this Petrotrin oil spill. It is generally thought that these oil spills come from basically boats on the sea getting rid of their waste, or because they might have a problem of some kind, you end up with a spill. We had a recent one within the last month And we've had several over the last years. Maybe you can tell me, let's say, how many we've had over the 5 years. But I am not aware that any culprit has ever been identified in such a situation and that any action has been taken against a perpetrator of such oil spills. Can you tell me something about that? Tell us.
You are correct. I mean, and one of the elements that we have pointed out is the weak legislation. The Parliament had before it the Maritime, and Deputy Chairman will be able to help me here in terms of the act, the Shipping Act, the Marine Pollution Act, which we think it's a good piece of legislation and that needs to be debated and put forward as quickly as possible. The incidents, with respect to incidents, it is always a challenge because sometimes the vessels are
How many, just a ballpark figure that you've had, let's say, over the 5 years?
I mean, I know we have it somewhere in the document. I don't want to guesstimate. Wayne, can you? We'll check for you because I know it's in the document. Okay. But in terms of, I would like to say, you know, because of the better collaboration and cooperation, the most recent incident, the investigations are still to be completed, but, you know, it appears that we would be identifying the culprit and will be taking action. And this action, of course, under their legislation will be by the Maritime Services Division. So that is something that we are looking cautiously, optimistically towards, because it looks like for the first time, based on the investigations, something will come out. And this is, we suspect, only because the vessel was still in port.
Yes. Most
of the times when these events occur, the vessels leave the jurisdiction and we are unable to take action.
Well,
so, hold on 1 minute, Chairman, Deputy Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to that particular matter, what we learned is that, what result is that we had the cooperation of the Maritime Services Division and also the Coast Guard and so on. We formed a committee in an attempt to probably result in litigation. As my chairman, as my managing director pointed out, the challenge is what we recognize, the Marine Pollution Act. We needed that piece of legislation to be in place. We looked also at our own legislation, our Section 70, because we were trying to initiate an action on our side, on the environmental management side. And in it, there's also weakness there, preventing us to proceed on our own. So in all circumstances, therefore, we really need a Marine Pollution Act to be enacted in order to strengthen what actions we may take in the marine environment. Thank you.
Well, I hope you are able to register first in terms of actually identifying and taking action. And the issues that you raise about strengthening of legislation, this committee can take into account in terms of the recommendations that we give to Parliament and to the minister responsible. Okay, you wanted to say something, Chair?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I listened to, you know, your statement of the public's interest in what is happening. And I think it's very important to raise the matter of the EMA's role in conservation of biodiversity. And I raise it because of the recent role of the EMA in supporting our sister agencies, that is the Forestry Division, in giving protection to Trinidad's national bird, the scarlet ibis, which was recently designated as an environmentally sensitive species with a fine of $100,000 and 2 years imprisonment. And I think it's very important because the inadequacies of the legislation under those agencies where fines are just like $2,000, recently raised to $10,000. So I think it's a very important role that the EMA plays in providing the support when needed by other state entities to protect our precious biodiversity.
Well, I have a question on this scarlet ibis for you, but I will leave it for now. I'll go on to my other members here, and I'll start with Mrs. Gopi Schoon, who expressed an interest in asking some questions.
Thank you very much, and for also your introductions that you made this morning. There are several areas that I wanted to question. You spoke about, Chairman, the environmental justice, and of course funding. And I also have an interest in your role in terms of national development. But before going there, I want to just go back to the questions raised about the oil spills in 2013, which really affected the people of Liberia and Carrot Shed, and of course the flora, the fauna, the environment, and so on. And I think the managing director spoke about the current ecological risk assessment which is being done. And we're very well aware of some of the investigations which were undertaken by Petrotrin then. And my simple question is, on the side of the EMA, did all of the investigations result in any litigation? And I need a direct answer to that. Was there any litigation? And again, going back to the legislation and the teeth that you need, because we've had recurring oil spills. I've looked at some of the fines under the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, a fine up to $10,000, which is really minuscule in terms of the kind of damage that we've had in the major oil spill of 2013. So, just please address me again on on the fact of litigation coming out of the 2013 oil spill, and also on the question of fines and their suitability and the necessary teeth that you need to be effective.
Thank you for those questions. Yeah, thank you for those questions. I will start. We have our legal manager here who will also assist. With respect to the 2013 spill, the EMA entered into a consent agreement, which is how our legislation operates with Petrotrin. And there was a fine of, don't hold me to it, and I think, Vanessa, 12 million. There was a fine of $12 million. Well, it wasn't a fine, it was a charge of $12 million, because this is what the money that is being used in terms of conducting, pardon me? $20 million. Of the $20 million, part of it, I think around $8 million was fine, and our fines go to the consolidated fund. So that went to the consolidated fund. And the $12 million is what we're doing with respect to the research in terms of the ecological risk assessment. And there was also remediation to take place of the material that was collected from the spill, and that is also taking place. So yes, there was a fine to Petrotrin, but this came out of a consent agreement, which is right out of the EM Act. We are very clear that the $10,000 fine in the existing legislation is totally inadequate. Hence the reason why we are pushing for Parliament to enact the Marine Pollution Act. It is there on the books. It has been there for a little while, and it needs to be debated and come out of Parliament. With respect to the EM Act, the EM Act and its subsidiary legislation is now, well, the EM Act is 24 years old. The subsidiary legislation is the CEC rules, which we did in 2001. The water pollution rules, which is 2006, the environmentally sensitive areas and species rules, which is 2001, the air pollution rules, which is very recent, 2014, and the outstanding, which we hope to put in place this year, is the waste rules. This legislation, when it was put in place, is what we would consider soft legislation. there was an expectation that we would have given citizens and businesses time to do the right thing, because we felt as all Trinidadians living in our little piece of rock, we would do the right thing. That is not happening. And therefore, we need to update our legislation. And I mean, very soon we will be coming to the Parliament. I mean, the water pollution rules, as the chairman says, we are, I don't want to say forced, but I mean, we were taken to court with respect to the water pollution rules. We lost at the Privy Council, and the Privy Council, I mean, told us that we had to do, to amend the water pollution rules. The amendments are out for public comment. There is a request to extend the public comment period to the 12th of next month, April. That is happening, and we expect that the revised water pollution fees and amendments will be in law, will be in place before the end of the year. I would like to pass over to the Deputy Chairman and the Manager Legal Services, both lawyers, who could tell us a little bit more in terms of legislation.
Is there anything else that you need clarity on?
Our piece of legislation.
Well, I think the MD covered the majority of what I needed to say. He spoke about the EMA Act, the subsidiary legislation. I mean, under the EMA Act, what we have, our compliance and enforcement provisions, as the MD, I'd like to reiterate what he said. It was always meant to be a collaborative effort with persons who don't comply with the environmental requirements. The purpose of the enforcement sections were really to say, okay, you are in violation of the law. It was never meant to be really punitive. Let us see how you can come to the EMA and we assist you with better environmental management. So we have these designated activities. We have 44 designated activities that the EMA has primary jurisdiction over. So you're setting up a poultry farm, you're stockpiling, there are a host of them. And once you are involved in these types of activities, the EMA, through the Certificate of Environmental Process, asks you to put in an application to us. And throughout that process, we will give you the conditions whereby you are going to establish your facility to ensure that it complies with all environmental regulations. Certainly, if it is that there is non-compliance through our compliance and enforcement sections, you are served with a notice of violation. And I must say, the majority of those persons who have been subject to our enforcement process usually want to settle the matter by way of consent agreement, as the MD was saying.
So we've gone a little bit from litigation and legislation, and I know we can leave the legislation in the capable hands of the Ministry of Planning and Development to bring forward to the Parliament. But you've gone on to something else, and you're talking about the expansion of your roles, and you were talking about the granting of CCs and so on, being one. And so let's establish that you do have a critical role to play in terms of the country's national development, in terms of industrialization and so on. But, and again, by the granting of certificates of environmental clearance and also EIAs, environmental impact assessments and so on. And I'm saying in the execution of these duties or services, as you may want to call them, the question to you now then would be, do you see yourself as more of a help or a hindrance in terms of national development? Because many times, and what I'm questioning here is the efficiency in the conduct of your activities, understanding that there are other parties to these arrangements and who also have responsibilities. But do you see yourself as being more either a help or a hindrance in terms of national development? Have you been efficient in terms of the granting of these CECs and EIAs, which are so very important to our national development and our growth? So could you respond to that?
With your permission, I will take that one. And I think it's a very simple, a very direct response would be, we see ourselves as a facilitator of development, sustainable development. And I would like to make the point that when this board came into office, you know, it's a culture shift as well that needed to happen even within the EMA. because there are those who see the EMA's role as the Environmental Protection Agency, whereas the EMA was set up for environmental management. And you ask, so the EMA looks at balancing the environment with development. And you ask about our efficacy timelines and so on. In many ways, we are bound by our standard operating procedures as well as statutory timelines embedded within the legislation in terms of period for public comment, the process itself, and so on. Based on the nature, scale, and location of projects, you would find that a project can be, within 2 months, the EMA would have sufficient information to make a determination, but in other instances, it may take a year, for example, where there is a need for an environmental impact assessment. But within the EMA, there are standard operating procedures which guide so that we are always fair. We put the environment first, but we recognize the role of the EMA as balancing development with the environmental concerns. Yeah, I hope I answered you.
Yes, you did, but my question really is, do you see yourself? I understand your role. Have you been efficient? Are you satisfied that your internal procedures, your mechanisms, your systems allow you to function efficiently so that you are not a hindrance to development?
Yes. There is always room for improvement with respect to efficiency. But when we measure how we have done in the granting of our CECs in terms of the timelines that are enshrined in the Act, we are over 85% of the time we meet our timelines. I think one of the things, Chairman, that we have to recognize, and the EMA has recognized, is that the EM Act is a really unique piece of legislation because it establishes something called a national register, because it lends itself to transparency. The national register is available to every citizen in Trinidad and Tobago to come in and visit. And therefore, the EMA, with respect to its process, must ensure that its processes are followed to the law, because any mistakes that we make will be picked up in the National Register by citizens, and of course it could lend itself to litigation on our end. So we are very clear that we need to achieve the efficiency, and we need, as the chairman said, to achieve the balance between the environment and sustainable development.
All right, I'll go on to the two senators because they have questions to ask, but just something I want to sort of underscore. I get the feeling that you are saying that given the research that has been done on issues like climate change and therefore the issues that have come out, given the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and given the Paris Agreement, that your legislation and the strength and power of the EMA is way, way below what it needs to be in order to effectively function in a 21st century world. Am I correct in my interpretation or no?
We wouldn't be that, I don't want to say drastic. We are saying the legislation needs to be revised. Like
so you want the legislation, do you want the power?
We have the power.
But you just
but
tell me you don't have the power.
We have the power, but our enforcement capability is just not there.
What do you need?
So in terms of what we need is that we need to change the enforcement clauses in the legislation.
But then you don't have the power.
Well, okay. Well, let's.
Can you meet the requirements of the Paris Agreement? Can you meet the requirements of the Sustainable Development Goals?
How we have
I don't want you to be
political
in your responses. I want real responses.
No, we're not being political, Chair. If the national environmental policy, which we have updated,
either we are for sustainable development or we are not. Either we believe in what is being said about climate change or we are not. Either we are meeting the requirements of the Paris Agreement or we are not. And if we are not, then we need these things. We need the strength, we need the legislation, we need the power. Say so that we could make the appropriate recommendations.
And Chair, we are in agreement with you that the changes are necessary. And changes must be made.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Now, one more question before I go on to Senator Tahaka. You mentioned over and over again the legislation having to do with marine pollution, I think you said. But the Deputy Clerk of the House just checked the legislation. There is no such legislation in the Parliament. Do you know where it is? Is it before the LRC, or did you send it to your ministry, or what?
No, this is not the EMA's legislation. This would be the Maritime Services Division legislation. So we know it's in draft, okay. But we're unsure where it is.
You don't know what stage it is?
Yeah, we're not sure. Yeah.
But this is another piece of legislation that is essential for you to enforce and therefore to act. Is that correct? That is correct. Okay. All right, Senator Tahaka.
Thanks, Chair. Good day again. I want to switch gears to the document you gave us. It's very detailed. It has to do with the parts, Appendix 13 on the employee breakdown. And I know at the beginning, the chairman indicated that you have some financial constraints. When you go to Appendix 13 and you turn the first leaf, there's no page number, so I guess it will be the second page. You see vacancies there, and the area with what appears to be the largest vacancies would be air waste and noise in terms of prorated as at the end, and then you have legal compliance and enforcement. So for example, you should have 100 environmental police officers. And this has been so for the past 5 years running, at least from this document, if not more than 5 years. Because I can't assume that it would have been much more than that going back, right? So let's say probably since the EMA has been in existence, you've not had full strength environmental police officers. So that means as a country, we have never been at full strength. What is required for that? Is that something that you require the police service to be involved in, or you have full control over that area?
We have full control over our environmental police unit, who are all SRPs. However, they're funded totally by the EMA. And unless, we have the budgetary allocations, we are unable to increase.
What is the specific role of this regarding the second question I have, which is the SDGs? So I'm seeing under the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, we have goal number 6, which is clean water and sanitation, and goal 14, which is life below water. And the chairman in opening indicated that marine pollution was earmarked as one of the 5 main areas. So are you funded properly to supervise marine pollution? Because the blue economy is an emerging aspect of our existence as a small island developing state. And if not, could this aspect be funded through any other mechanism? For example, the entities that use the waterways. Is there any mechanism, given the current confines of the law, that allows you to extract fees for simply usage of the waterways? And a complement to that question is with the oil spill in Petrotrin. Petrotrin had a perennial spill. The massive spills were basically above the normal levels. I grew up in Marabella when I went to secondary school in San Fernando. And now that the refinery is no longer running, persons are reporting that they're catching large fish on the Guacara River. All right. So the first part of the question, what is the role of the Marine Police in relation to marine pollution? What aspects, what powers you have to charge users of the waterways, whether it be oil exploration companies or shipping lines, and any comment regarding the role of the police and the pollution of the rivers in Trinidad?
Okay, let me try. So the EMA, in its role as coordinator, will engage other agencies who have distinct responsibilities for the environment. For example, the Maritime Services Division. So marine pollution, depending on scale, because once what's the oil pollution? Yeah.
Contingency.
No, the oil spill plan. Once the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan comes into play, that is the Ministry of Energy. But for the smaller spills, we're dealing with the Maritime Services Division. And the EMA really is just...
The Maritime Services Division of where?
Of the Ministry of Works and Transport, right? So the EMA really is performing a coordinating role when it comes to some of those incidents. So in terms of collecting money and that sort of thing, I mean, that's not in the remit of the EMA at all. With respect to the perennial spills at Petrotrin, once, I mean, we get any information on a spill, we would send a team and investigate. And depending on the nature or the scale of the spill, I mean, we would either, the company would either do some sort of cleanup operation if it's a very small spill, or, if we need to engage other resources, of course, we will do that.
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions at this point in time. Jumping off from your comments on pollution, what role does the EMA have in investigating, monitoring the constant pollution, deep water pollution, that really is pervasive on the southern and eastern coast of Trinidad? Because that's a fact. There is constant pollution of the water. And I don't know what measures, what methods you have in place to monitor and deal with it.
Constant deep water pollution. Well, I think we are hoping, or we have an expectation, that the ecological risk assessment that we're doing right now, which is really, and maybe Wayne could talk a little bit more about it, between Pointe-a-Pierre and Icarcus, well, one of the things that it will identify is something that we know exists, but we don't know the extent of, which is natural seepage. Similarly to how we have the Pitch Lake, where we see the natural seeps, there are also natural seeps in the Gulf of Paria. They have been identified for a lot of years now. To what extent is that responsible for some of the oil that we're seeing in the Gulf in that area? We are hoping that we will get that information from the ecological risk assessment. Go on.
Yeah. So I will help his response and indicate that the EMA can assist with respect to the land-based sources of pollution. And through its water pollution rules, we can regulate what's going in. Okay, and because I think that's what you are asking in terms of, you didn't specify what type of pollution, the sources of pollution. So I'm responding that with respect to the land-based sources of pollution, we would be regulating that through the water pollution rules. And with your permission, Chairman, I would like to ask the Manager Technical Services to just elaborate a bit about that. So, Wayne?
Good morning, all. So just to take up on the question about the pollution you mentioned about deep water pollution of the East Coast and other parts of Trinidad. What entails any new development, whether it's oil and gas exploration on any of the offshore deep water areas, would have to go through the CC process, the Certificate of Environmental Clearance Rules. That process is an environmental certification process that assesses the project and institutes mitigation measures to ensure that that development at whatever offshore location, measures will be put in to mitigate and minimize the impacts as much as possible. And that process, there is a public involved in that whole process as well. So the CEC would be the instrument to manage and mitigate any sort of pollution that will be taken in for new types of development or any modification to existing oil and gas exploration projects on the East Coast, etc. Now, we mentioned about the amendments to the water pollution rules, especially the fees regulation. So the fees regulation, what we have proposed is a model that has been utilized in the Jamaican jurisdiction, which sort of calculates the amount of pollution using the polluter's pays principle. You pay as you pollute. So the more you pollute, the more you pay. And the monies that is collected from that, from those fees will be used to correct environmental damage wherever it occurs in Trinidad and Tobago. So that is a mechanism for remediating and mitigating pollution in various areas of Trinidad and Tobago under the new and revised water pollution rules.
And those have not been put in place as yet?
No, as the chairman and the managing director indicated, those rules are still out of public comment, and the public comment closes on the 12th of April this year.
So with regard to the constant pollution that's happening with existing projects, very little is being done to stop that pollution from happening?
Well,
or to monitor it?
Well, as I said before, projects that would have the benefit of the CC process would have already have measures to mitigate the pollution to the lowest levels. Yes, there's always an impact from any type of development, and as we indicated, the ecological risk assessment that is being done for the Southwest Peninsula, based on the findings of that, we are also going to utilize that to do a similar ecological risk assessment for the East Coast, where it will identify what are the significant chemicals of concern, and then we work to develop further management strategies to further mitigate those things, whether it's from natural occurrences or whether it's associated with the Orinoco flow. As you know, our water quality is influenced a lot by the discharges from the South American Peninsula. So that is an important thing that we need to understand. And through these types of research, we will be able to better understand what are the major factors influencing.
What's your time frame for having these studies completed?
Well, the ecological risk assessment is an 18-month project that started in April of last year. So by November of this year, we should have completed the study for the Southwest Peninsula, and subsequent to that, we will, once there's available funding, because these studies are very expensive, funding will have to be sourced to do a similar for the East Coast.
Chairman, I have one more question. The environment impact analysis studies done for the new highway projects, such as the Toko Manzanilla project, did you take into account greenhouse gas emissions? Because you know we have to reduce emissions by 15% by 2030. And also, did you make like recommendations for the use for such highway projects with respect to transport, like having bus lanes, carpool lanes, and those kinds of things, transport recommendations, in an effort to reduce the greenhouse gases?
So those EIAs we would have introduced climate change mitigation and adaptation conditions in the terms of reference that would inform the EIA. So those would be built in terms of the EIA report. In terms of building the highway to accommodate bus lanes and those things, that would be a feature of the proponent who is building the highway. And I know some of those are considerations that have been entertained in terms of these new highways.
So the answer is yes.
As far as we are aware, yes.
Okay.
I'll go on to MP Leons now, but I want to ask one quick question before. What is the jurisdictional overlap between the EMA and the IMA when it comes to matters having to do with the ocean?
I will take that. The Institute of Marine Affairs is really a research institution. Yeah, so they would prepare, do research and prepare they also prepare state of the marine environment report. So we will
They will influence how you act.
Yes, so they will influence policy, they would provide valuable information, but they are not an enforcement agency.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. I've been listening, and two questions I really have. One concerning the EMA's relationship with their stakeholders. So, for example, Ministry of Works and the Marine. Am I to understand correctly that the relationship that you have, it sometimes retards your ability to do proper management of the issues that we deal with in the Marine?
Okay, I'll take that as well. I will not put it that way. We do recognize that we are a regulatory body as well. However, our role of coordinating, we take very, very, we value it. And therefore, we actually, through a mechanism of the EM Act, we have both memoranda of agreement that we can sign with various memoranda of understanding with various governmental entities, and we also have a mechanism to appoint environmental officers under various ministries, an action which we have been engaged in over the previous 2 years, where they actually imbibe the EMA's values and functions within the operations of those entities. So we have we do so by cooperation with state entities, but we also recognize and keep uppermost our regulatory role as well.
Okay, I understand that. The reason why I'm asking is because who is accountable? Because it's good to have the support of the EMA and the information and the studies, which I'm understanding is very expensive. But then for proper management and efficiencies of and implementation of this, who is accountable, and is the relation, what I'm asking, if the relationship where you just give support stymies the implementation of your recommendation. Also, why I'm also asking this is because funding is a major issue, and if you all are spending money doing all these studies and stuff for the benefit of these stakeholders, where I'm seeing you all have issues with staff and how to keep staff and how to attract the right people. Maybe some of that funding can be geared towards improvement of the management within the EMA, and use some funding from the stakeholders, the different stakeholders, whether it comes from the Ministry of Works or the various ministries. I'm saying this because after you spend this money, who is accountable for the implementation of these recommendations?
A challenge that the EMA faces with everybody we deal with, including government, is that we are the regulator. So the EMA don't only regulate the private sector, we also regulate government, who in many cases are the largest project developer. And therefore, the only money that we will take from government is their fees when they put in the applications for the various projects and the transfer that the Parliament gives us to run the business of the EMA annually. In terms of getting any other monies from government or private sector entities, it's a big challenge for the EMA that we're really looking at, because we cannot be accused of being in the hands of any entity. And that entity will include, of course, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, except with respect to the transfer, which is approved by the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. So the EMA values its independence, because if the EMA is not seen to be independent, we end up into problems. So as an independent institution, we have to be cautious. And therefore, we depend on our conversations with the various agencies to encourage them to use their legislation and to act.
Okay, that was nicely put. So then, as the chair was indicating, then maybe some tweaking of the legislation should be made for you all to have a little more teeth. What are some of the major, because I heard you speak about the draft for maritime. What are some of the major legislative amendments that you all are currently looking at for amendment, so that you all can better and effectively do the management as you all are formed to do?
Hello. From a compliance and enforcement perspective in particular, it may very well be, and this is what we've been starting our research on, is to change the whole structure so that we now have more criminal offenses, so that, for example, or larger administrative fines for non-compliance with certificate of environmental clearance, because, you know, you have conditions in a CEC that are purely administrative, whereby they need to notify us of start of works. But then you have the ones where are a bit more onerous, where you must implement certain things. So if it is you don't comply with an administrative requirement, what we're looking at is other jurisdictions, because where it could be more stringent. And I think that's what we've been looking at all these years. So compliance and enforcement is a major aspect of improvement in our legislation, because Trinidad and Tobago is a country where it needs to be constantly policed. People don't automatically do the right thing, in particular for the environment. But if they believe that a big fine is hanging over their head, it may very well be that people decide, okay, let me comply faster because, you know, there's a major financial penalty. So from that aspect, that is what we're looking at.
Last question. Well, basically, you're saying that you have everything more or less in place, and is basically to increase the fines?
Specifically compliance and enforcement. That's really what I would be referring to. With respect to the other pieces of legislation, we have our fees and regulations. For example, the application fee for to apply for a certificate of environmental clearance is $500, and that fee has not changed in all these years that we've been in existence. However, different applications require different depth of, a poultry farm application as opposed to maybe an oil and gas application, certain levels of complexity. $500 cannot cover the processing one type of application as opposed to processing a different type of application. So we're also looking at amending to increase the amount of application fees that we can charge as opposed to a set standard $500 fee.
Okay, and just going on what was asked earlier, what are you doing, or what have you done to improve the efficiency of the CECs and the feedback? Have you incorporated any new technology? Are you moving away from manual? What is being done to improve? Because one of the major issues that are raised is the length of time. I'm happy to hear that you all have been in time compliant, but what has or what is being done to improve the efficiencies for these types of applications?
So if I could interject. So we all know that we're into the fourth industrial revolution, which is making everything digital and being done electronically, submission of application forms electronically, payment, etc. So the EMA is looking to develop our capabilities to have these services on the similar to what is on TT BizLink through your TT Connect number, etc. So we are in the process of doing that and trying to institute a paperless environment. So have all our documents electronic versus paper. That in itself would increase the efficiency from the applicant to the EMA and turnaround times in being able to deliver a good customer service. So we are in the process of doing that. We're not there yet, but we're in the process of making our services.
Is there a timeline?
Well, we started through the knowledge management process. We have been able to acquire a software, Microsoft SharePoint, and that is the environment we will use to build out our digital system. So, and that we have 50 licenses right now, and we're up to 250 licenses, and we're rolling out that in an incremental basis.
So when do you?
So we're hoping by the end of this year to start utilizing that services more in a enterprise-wide.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you very much. I want to ask some questions. For every drilling for oil and gas, a CEC has to be prepared before the drilling. Is that correct? Okay. So every single drilling exercise that we have, like a Juniper or a Truck or Angeline and so on, there are mitigation requirements for anticipated pollution. All right? Does that mean that every drilling that takes place in the country actually results in some pollution of some kind?
Before we go, I can tell you that in between 2015 and 2018, we haven't been able to identify where the size or anything, but there were 377 oil and chemical spills that we have recorded.
Based on the current drilling arrangements?
Based on all the current, but this is both oil and chemicals, so chemicals in a warehouse or something, but 377. So go on.
And are the mitigation requirements equal to the challenge that that poses to the ordinary mind responding to that?
In most instances, the mitigation requirements are in place. And therefore, this is, I think, why we don't, you don't see it out in the newspapers and everything else. So in most cases, the mitigation requirements are there. But please, Wayne.
Okay.
Right, so the CEC has conditions that would ensure that once it's been complied with, you'll have a residual impact. So it's minimized as much as possible. There are some challenges with some of the operators in terms of their produced water, because the treatment available, the space for treatment on these offshore platforms are not suitable for very elaborate and sophisticated treatment technology. So yes, it can be done, but at a very high cost. So there is some residual impact in terms of produced water, some of the pollutants that cannot be treated effectively in certain jurisdictions. And that is why we are saying also that the ecological risk assessment is also would want to be applied in areas to see what is the impact of those residual pollutants that cannot be effectively treated in an offshore environment. So the point is that there's going to be pollution, but the purpose of this certificate is to ensure that it's minimized to the residual and acceptable level. Okay. And collectively, that is why you need to do the ecological risk assessment, because you want to see what is the cumulative impact of all these releases.
Okay, but from general knowledge of drilling and for oil and gas and its impact, without the specific research information that you are waiting on now from your ecological study, are you able to kind of figure out what are the likely problems that might emerge from a drilling operation by a particular company in a particular place? Right,
so yes, so they would be required as part of the conditions to submit reports, monitoring reports, subsequent to the drilling program. They have to submit to the EMA periodic reports.
And you monitor those?
Yes, and we would assess those and look at the veracity of the information that is presented. And if there's any issues, we would seek to get clarification on those reports.
Do you have any CECs before you now for drilling in 2019 and 2020?
Yes, we certainly have from the various operators.
Okay. I want to ask you something, which is that when we had this Sandals controversy in Trinidad and Tobago, part of that controversy had to do with the CEC application for that particular operation. Can you truthfully tell us what was the nature of the issue or challenge or controversy involving that particular entity, the Sandals operation?
Chair, the Sandals, and it was the application did not come from Sandals. The application came from a special purpose company established to execute. Right. Yes. And the application was before the EMA. The EMA responded in terms of further information. So in terms of any controversy, the EMA has no knowledge in terms of what controversy was there. We had an application before us. We responded to the application with a request for further information, as we do with all applications. Yes. And subsequent to which we heard that the project was no longer was no longer a go. However, to date, we have not received any letter saying that the application is withdrawn. So the application is still before the EMA.
Was the proportion or the parcel of land for the Sandals project? It seems to me that if you make an application like that, you would have to identify the parcel of land. Was that identified?
They did identify the parcel of land, and think some of the further information requests was in terms of the scope of the project and to actually show us all the boundaries. Because, in examining and reviewing the application, we have to determine whether or not we would require them to conduct an environmental impact assessment.
Okay. Are you able from memory or recall, or can you provide to the committee at some point what was the identifiable parcel of land by the company making the request?
Sure. I mean, it's
Do you
totally
remember
available,
now?
and we could provide. I mean, we can, if you're interested, we could provide the application to the committee. It's in the National Register.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
sure.
And can I ask what were some of the things that you requested from the company that have not been yet provided?
So some of the things was the scope, the amount of rooms, because there was some conflict.
It wasn't
in terms,
identified.
right?
Okay.
The number of rooms in terms of how much water they would be using, and what would be the water be used for in terms of their wastewater treatment, in terms of the location of some of their structures. I mean, if they could confirm where the structures would be, in terms of the amount of acreage they would be developing, because there were wetlands in the area.
Yes.
So we were concerned in terms of the wetlands. That was
all right.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Information that the EMA, any EMA would want. All right. One more thing. My colleague, MP Leons, raised the issue of I think you raised the issue of independence, and he then raised the issue of legislation in relation to that. Now, you said a very important thing here, which I think the population does not quite understand, which is the EMA is an independent entity that really addresses environmental issues in relation to development for both private sector and state-related development. As a result, the EMA's business, mandate, perspective, view of the world has to be what is good for Trinidad and Tobago that manages and balances industrial development requirements and other requirements and environmental conservation consideration. Now, in view of that, in the legislation that you anticipate that will be of value to the EMA, do you think that the issue of the independence and autonomy of the EMA has to be strengthened in that legislation?
Chairman, I would like to say that we have been, the EMA has had to take a sort of piecemeal approach
Yes.
to fixing some of its legislation. So currently, the EMA is engaged in looking at its principal legislation and subsidiary legislation in a more comprehensive manner. So I wanted to address when Member Leon spoke that while we are coming with some piecemeal amendments, we really are taking a bigger look at it.
Bigger picture view.
Looking at the bigger picture. And in fact, there are some pieces of the legislation that in fact haven't even been tested and explored to its fullest. And in my opening statement, I would have referred to some sections with respect to even growing the Environmental Trust Fund through incentives and so on. And these are areas, even though it's 24 years, the EMA still considers itself a maturing organization. There's still so much that we can apply, but there is a need for a more comprehensive global look. So that is happening currently, and we expect, therefore, that through the line ministry, the EMA would bring some amendments that would be required to bring it more efficient, to improve its efficacy, and so on. So with your permission, I'd just like to just add one more point to when Member Leon spoke, and he spoke about, the budgetary concerns. And I wanted to point out that we are not constrained by, through the Environmental Trust Fund, by accessing international funds. And we have recently applied to the Green Climate Fund, which is an instrument, the financial instrument of the UN, UNFCCC climate change treaty. We have recently applied to become accredited, which would put us in a situation, a place where we can access that international fund. And that would be for climate change, mitigation, adaptation projects. So I just wanted to make the point, we are exploring other opportunities to grow our environmental trust fund.
Okay, good.
Oh, sorry, I'm just a closing question for me. With regard to noise pollution, which we haven't spoken about at all. We've just come through a wonderful carnival, good music and so on. I've ended up with tinnitus, and I'm sure I'm not the only person out there has ended up like that. Yes, so as we package our lovely festival and we seek to export it and so on, there are some responsibilities. And I look at, again, and Senator Obika raised the question of your environmental police. And I'm going to ask a direct question. Over at Carnival 2019, was any organization or person or DJ or anybody charged with noise pollution? Because in as much as we want to package this nicely and it all goes well, there are some serious responsibilities.
Again, through our compliance and enforcement sections, what individuals or entities that would be hosting carnival events would do is that they would put in an application for noise variation, and there's a certain time period they have to put it in before the event is held, which of course allows them to exceed the decibel level up to a certain amount for certain times. And certainly when our environmental police officers went out and monitored these events, if they were in exceedance of the permitted exceedance, they would have been issued a notice of violation and fined accordingly. I can't give you the figure, but yes, we had a host of notices of violation over the period, yes.
Let me say a little bit. So, with respect to noise, 2018 Carnival, we would consider successful, because there are some events which, although they may have had a variation from the EMA, like an event at the National Stadium where there was fireworks, and that concerns us because nowhere in the application had anything to do with fireworks. And we're even more concerned because the fire services and the police were present for the fireworks. And therefore, maybe, we're not being as successful as we think we're being with respect to our coordination with the other agencies. Because noise is really the remit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Yes, they have so much more doing that maybe they don't take it as seriously as they should. But we at the EMA, we're trying very hard in terms of the summary offenses bill to get the police involved in noise. But 2018, we want to say, in terms of noise, 2018 was quite successful because most of the promoters were obeying the instructions of the Environmental Police Unit.
Just perhaps you can send to the office, to the Parliament, the any charges, number of persons, organizations that would have been charged for the last 3 years. So we have a sense of whether you're executing your responsibilities with regard to monitoring noise pollution. Yeah?
Senator Obika.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Second on the topic of environmental policing, illegal quarrying is a big issue in Trinidad and Tobago. Sometimes you would see a place looking pristine, and then you pass back and you see part of a hill taken away. Does the EMA police that directly, or that is for the general police service? And also, well, if the EMA polices it, how many successful convictions, let's say, we've had over the past 5 years, 10 years?
I can say the role of the EMA with respect to quarrying would be through the designated activity number 23, where any person who wants to do quarrying will have to apply for a certificate of environmental clearance, which we will monitor. Quarrying, though, is really the agency that's responsible for quarrying and for licensing of quarries is the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. The EMA will go out to investigate with the primary agency, which is the Ministry of Energy, and other agencies, because the Commission of State Lands will be involved, because in some cases this is on state lands. The Forestry Division may be involved. And again, we have not been very successful. What we're attempting to do is through the collaborative approach, because any action that you're taking, you have to ensure that all the ducks are lined up, because there have been instances where action has been taken and the state has lost in the courts because the ducks didn't line up. I mean, proper procedures in terms of collection of evidence and were not followed. So we're trying to formulate a plan in terms of how to deal with illegal quarries with all the agencies.
So just a short follow-up, is there a hotline for quarrying? Because quarrying is a highly capital-intensive affair, and there are persons who enter quarrying who could lose their shirt, basically, in business terms, if you stop them. And that serves as a deterrent to persons who want to enter the illegal quarrying endeavor. So if there's a hotline, persons can look out for illegal quarrying activities, and many communities are very aware of them, and they can alert the relevant authorities.
Well, I'm not sure if there's a hotline for quarrying, but the EMA surely has an emergency number, 6809588. And of course, there is also complaints at ema.co.tt, where people can report, I mean, any illegal activities or any activities that result in environmental problems.
Senator Sipazat.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions. The first relates to the Environmental Trust Fund. Do you have a policy which guides how you use the fund, given the fact that you all get annual funding from the government of Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, thank you, Member. The Environmental Trust Fund is firstly guided by the legislative requirements under the EMA Act. Yes, under the requirements of the EMA Act. We also have a number of policies that guide us. For example, you would see the EMA Act speaks to the excess funds. We have recently instituted an investment policy and guidelines that guides how the fund is utilized. In terms of policy, we have actually drafted a finance and accounting policy, which is being reviewed at this point in time, and we have some timelines to bring it for approval as well.
So you also have trustees who manage the fund?
Yes, there is a board of trustees, and if you look at the EM Act as well too, the board of trustees is appointed out of the board of directors in a similar manner.
May I just add, and it's appointment by Her Excellency, the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
You all would submit annual financial statements and that kind
yes.
of thing that are audited as well?
Yes, those form part of the audited statement.
The other question I have has to do with your internal audit function. Do you have an internal audit schedule, and are you following it, and are the reports sent to the board? If you could tell me about, and as well, is it staffed adequately?
So I will take part of it. I would just like to say we do have an internal audit department. At this point in time, it's unstaffed because our internal auditor just resigned because she has for better opportunities, and we are actively at this point in time recruiting. In fact, the last part of our competency-based recruitment process is taking place next week. So we expect to have our internal auditor back on board shortly. We do have an audit schedule which we follow. Actually, we have an audit committee of the board, chaired by one of the directors, comprising members of the board as well, and supported by the internal audit department. Whether the question of adequate staffing, we have addressed that. We would like to, in fact, increase it, and we have addressed that. It forms part of a revised organizational structure that we have recently completed, and it's now before the minister for her consideration.
A couple of things, a follow-up on this trust fund matter. 5 members of the board of directors of the authority, other than the manager and director, shall be designated by the president to act as trustees. So the presidential appointments are really from the existing board. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
The board is also.
And basically, they are responsible for the trust fund?
Yes, so we monitor the trust fund. In fact, we prepare an annual trustees report. We monitor the accounts on a monthly basis through the board procedures.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And then, with regard to the trust fund and finances, it says, it talks about incentive measures, demonstration projects, emergency response activities, public awareness. I just want a response from you on whether the purposes for which the money in the trust fund is being used are indeed for those purposes. And if they are for any other thing else, anything else, would you say what they are?
Chairman, at this point in time, the trust fund, it's mainly funded through the transfer, because I made mention earlier that we haven't really begun to explore the various avenues there are for growing the trust fund. Okay. So it's basically the transfers and the fees that are collected, for example, with the applications for CCs, the fees under the water pollution rules, and so on. So at this point in time, the trust fund would really be used for the day-to-day operations of the EMA as it is allowed under the under Section 72. There isn't excess at this point in time or leeway to do much.
Okay. How much money do you have in those funds?
So at this point, it's one fund with several accounts.
Yes.
And I would transfer you to the financial accountant who can give you that information.
The reason I ask is because based on 2012, you have about 46 million in it, I think.
Yeah, so.
Huh? Yeah. So I wanted to know if it was more significant or not.
Currently, we have 9.4 million in our operating account.
For the fund?
For the fund.
Okay. Okay. All right, I have some other different questions for you. I know that you mentioned there are 5 issues that you are kind of focused on right now, all right? But what are the main conservation challenges and issues that we should be concerned about or that you are concerned about? And I want you to identify the main geographical areas in which these present a problem.
You know,
You could go
why,
ahead. You
Chair,
could go ahead.
Chair, why we laugh? Because, you know...
well, I seem to have amused you a lot this
yes.
morning.
You have.
Because, Chair, you know, we come to the Parliament and we hope the Parliament will be lead in terms of not having plastic bottles, because this is a major issue that we all face on a day-to-day basis. So I think waste on the whole came out as the #1 issue. And it wasn't scientific in terms of it was complaints that the EMA have received. It was based on our public consultations when we did to revise the national environmental policy, and it was based on environmental literacy survey that we did. Again, in terms of revision of the national environmental policy. So that's how we came up with these items. So the #1 was waste. How we are dealing with waste at the EMA is we expect that the waste rules will be law before the end of the year, and that's the only piece of subsidiary legislation that is still outstanding in the EMA Act. The second item was enforcement legislation and implementation. It tells us that we need to do the amendments to the EMA Act in terms of enforcement so that we give ourselves more power and maybe have, you know, criminal offenses in the Act.
Well, glad you say that now, because when I ask you if you want more power, you tell me no.
You know, power is a difficult word. Maybe I don't like this power word. I mean, it's to
if you use power judiciously, the country would be fine.
Okay.
It is the abuse of power that is a problem. Power itself is not a problem.
Thank you, Chairman. The third one was what the member brought up, which is noise pollution. And noise pollution we're dealing with again in terms of all the collaboration with all the agencies. The fourth one was water pollution. And that is being handled through the revision of the water pollution rules. And the fifth one was just education. And the education we want to say is not only for the EMA, but we also think it's important for parliamentarians.
Consciousness raising.
Yeah.
But I asked you a question about geographical areas.
In terms of...
Are there any problems that can be geographically identified that need to be attended to?
When we talk about quarrying, we're talking basically about the northeastern region, simply because that is where the resources are in terms of the sand and gravel resources. In terms of oil pollution...
Do any of the quarries replenish after... Let's say the quarries dig up an acre and take all the gravel and so on from it. Do they replenish that acre before they go on to the next one, or 5 at a time or something like that?
It is something that in the CECs that we're now stressing on rehabilitation. We also have an international waters and ecosystem management project where the EMA with Global Environmental Facility Funding is actually doing a demonstration area of how you can rehabilitate and how you can rehabilitate both efficiently and effectively. So that is a project that we're doing with Jeff funding, and the pilot site is in national quarries. So
what other geographical areas?
In terms of other geographical areas, Gulf of Paria, in not only with respect to oil pollution, but remember that's the industrial side. That's the industrial pollution side.
Can that problem be solved?
Of course. I think through studies like the ecological risk assessment, we can identify where the problem is coming from, and therefore we can have a more focus.
But wouldn't that require all the companies to comply?
And hence, as you say, I mean, once we have the information, we can now start taking action.
And you believe that that is doable because they say that the fish from that area is not really edible.
Well, the evidence that we have so far in terms of testing the fish does not,
does not
support that.
International
Okay.
testing.
Yeah.
So you have scientific evidence.
We have
to
scientific
say
evidence
that the pollution is not so heavy
exactly
as to contaminate the fish.
Correct. Yes.
And shrimp.
I'm not going to go to shrimp because we did not test the shrimp. Or we have not tested the shrimp. Are we testing shrimp in this? Yes. With the ecological risk assessment that we do now.
You know the Gulf is a major area for shrimp farm.
We do, yes.
Shrimp fishing.
Yes,
right?
so for the study between Pointe-a-Pierre and Icarcus, we are actually testing shrimp.
So we should get some information on that,
right,
to give comfort to the citizens.
Well, yes,
food for the table.
But let's be careful. One swallow, not a summer make. This is one set of testing. The challenge is always the resources, but we need to continue it to have the information.
All right. So where else we have the problem? Northeastern region with these quarries.
Yeah.
We have the
Gulf
problem in the Gulf
in
with the
terms of
fish and
industry.
shrimps. Mm-hmm.
Where else? I think those are the major. I think those are the two hot spots, if you want to call them.
Are the coastal erosion issues under your jurisdiction in any way?
Not really. Not directly. So
okay.
The IMA would be doing all the research in terms of.
So they'll do the research, and the Ministry of Works is involved.
Well, correct. In terms of the Coastal Protection Unit.
All right. What about what you wanted to say something, Pia? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to indicate there is a project where it's the Intercoastal Zone Management Committee, which is an integrated committee of Ministry of Works, Ministry of Planning, and several of the other agencies, looking at an integrated approach to dealing with coastal management. So, yes, pollution, yes, in terms of remediation along the coastlines and things like that. So that will be a more coordinated response.
Okay, so this is for both Trinidad and Tobago.
Trinidad and Tobago, yes.
Okay, and another thing I wanted to, is the EMA involved in facilitating, supporting, encouraging, pushing the country in the direction of anything related to solar, wind, or renewable energy projects and investment? And can you do that? Do you have the power, the authority, the influence? Can you do that? Because that's important.
We do it indirectly through the CEC process, because we're pushing climate smart development in the CEC process. We had one project in terms of a pilot with respect to solar that is still to be completed in terms of the highway, the police surveillance base. But other than that, we are very active in terms of the various committees that the Ministry of Energy has with respect to recycling and renewable energy.
Yes, you want to say something on that?
Yes, Chair. Again, these are all policy decisions, policy interventions. So yes, EMA would not be directly responsible for that, but as the Ministry of Planning, that we are working with several entities. We actually will be working with the European Union on one of the projects for solar paneling. We're also doing a number of other things with the public transportation. But with Trinidad and Tobago, and I think this is a question that you had asked earlier, about Trinidad and Tobago's contribution, national determined contributions. There are about 3 areas that we have direct interventions with, which would be including transportation. And that sort of transportation network will speak towards the dealing with climate mitigation along the lines, and of course an integrated approach again to ensuring that we do the addressing of the climate change issues in a coordinated way across the different ministries and agencies, as well as the private sector and civil society. So it will not be within the remit of only the EMA. They would be one of our partners, but not the only agency that would be involved in this.
Okay, and given that pollution from cars is one of our main problems in Trinidad and Tobago, and per capita we are pretty bad internationally. I mean, I know that there is significant conversion over an extended period of time, or perhaps not significant conversion, but I know that there is a thrust towards conversion over a fair number of years to CNG. But given the abundance of electricity supply in Trinidad and Tobago, and given the cleanness of that, might we not begin to think, and since we import all our vehicles anyway, might we not think, well, first of all, what is the thinking about CNG versus electric? And might we not think about electric in terms of the future of the country?
Yes, Chair, we are looking at those options, but maybe Dr. Prasad would be better equipped to answer the interventions that we are doing in this area.
Okay.
Yes, you're correct, Mr. Chairman. CNG, I would consider transitional fuel. So moving from the gasoline and diesel powered vehicles to CNG is a cleaner burning fuel, and then the trust is to move from that to zero emission vehicles, which would be electric and hybrids. And I think you would notice some intervention has been taken place in that regard. And you'd see certain hybrid vehicles and so forth on the nation roadways already. Certain dealerships and stuff are offering those vehicles. So there is movement in that direction, and the public is taking up those sort of incentives to go towards electrics and hybrid vehicles.
All right. Could I ask my colleagues if they have any final questions before we close? We okay? All right. I want to thank you very much, Permanent Secretary, Chairman, and board members, CEO, and other officials from the Ministry of Planning for not just attending, but participating fully. I'm glad that the hesitation about what the EMA needs gave way to perhaps a more factual assertion of position. Because, I mean, when we come to these committees, what happens is that based on what you say, we make recommendations. The recommendations then go to Parliament. And specific issues are raised with the minister responsible. Or if there is more than one minister, we also raise those. And then we get a response. You know, they might say, yes, we can, no, we cannot. We could do this, but not this, or whatever. And that involves an engagement which can affect what actually happens. And it is important to be, you know, very straightforward here so that we get the truth and we could then deal with the facts. I thought that you were forthright in your answers and you gave us a lot of information. The environment is a very, very important thing, and the EMA is a critical institution. My own view is that the EMA doesn't have the teeth or the resources, based on all the documents that I see here, nor does it have the financial means. We didn't interrogate all of those issues, but that is clear from the documentation. And the environmental issues are going to become more challenging as we go forward. And we are an island, and that has its own problems. We are the most industrialized island in the CARICOM, basically, and that creates another set of problems. And the balance between environmental considerations and developmental opportunities and challenges are very real. And the way you manage the industrialization from the way the world is going, well, in the context of where the world is going, but recognizing that we are a fossil fuel-based economy that wants to transform. The way you manage that is very, very critical, and the EMA becomes vital in that regard. So this is a very important issue, a very important institution. and it really has to do with the sustainability of the nation afterwards. So we thank you for participation. We thank you for your answers and your comments on the issues that we raised. I thank all my colleagues for their own very pointed questions. We thank the members of the public gallery for being here. And most of all, we thank the press, and we hope that they will convey to the population the important things that were that came out of this particular meeting that is of interest to the population. The environment should be a concern for everybody, and sustainable development should be a concern of everybody in this society. So I thank you again, and this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.